Hi, and welcome to this video review for the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe on Nintendo Switch. It's been a while since I last did a video review, and the reason we're here today is due to the kind donation of Ben over on the eShopper Reviews Patreon, who sponsored this review. Thank you again, Ben. Before starting this review, I just want to give a warning that some of what I talk about here could be considered spoilers, and one of the more delightful things about the Stanley Parable is going into the game fresh without expectations. If you have not yet played the Stanley Parable before, I'm just going to go ahead and say that you should absolutely play this game. Don't bother with the rest of this review. It is a truly unique experience. If you have played an earlier version of this game, know that this release has a hefty amount of new content, and that content is so well crafted that it makes this game worth getting again, even if you've already played previous versions. I'll detail why in a bit, but if you want to avoid spoilers, the short version is, whether you've played earlier versions of this game before or not, you should absolutely get the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. Okay, so on to the review itself. The Stanley Parable has a long history over on PC. It was originally released as a free mod to Half-Life 2, but after increased popularity and critical acclaim, it was later remade and re-released as a standalone game. Ultra Deluxe is actually the second time this game has been re-released, with this release marking the game's first appearance on consoles, and in turn the first release on a Nintendo platform. The Stanley Parable is a walking simulator, and while many tend to associate that genre with slow pacing and a lack of interaction, the Stanley Parable is a game that is all about player choice and interaction, in ways that even challenge the concept of what it means to be a video game. Players nominally take on the role of the titular Stanley, an office worker with a boring desk job who one day discovers his office is curiously empty. However, I say this is nominally what the game is about, because ultimately, this is little more than a staging device for a game that is actually about the player's relationship with the narrator in a digital medium. The most iconic moment in the Stanley Parable is likely a point early into the game when the players come to a room with two doors, and the narrator helpfully tells the player that Stanley walked through the door on the left. Players are not obligated to follow this direction, however, and are free to defy the narrator, much to his consternation. This is one of the major elements of this game's phenomenal sense of humor, thanks to some truly great writing and excellent voice acting by British voice actor Kevon Brighting, who creates much of this game's delightful personality through his patronizing tone when you do as he tells you, and his indignant tone when you don't. It doesn't take long for this game to take on some fourth wall-breaking postmodernist elements, with fun references to other games, and exploration of the concepts that go into making a game. Through the course of this game's countless story paths and endings, players will break the game apart, explore it behind the scenes, warp reality, get transported into other games, and even see the game rebuilt from the ground up, all based on the choices the player makes, and the friction this causes with the narrator. It bears mention that these choices are generally just choosing to walk one direction rather than another, although players can occasionally move a cursor over objects and click on them. However, there's not any complex interaction with the environment here. For the most part, the game's branching narrative, if you can even call it a narrative, is simply about the player making the choice, not about any difficulty in executing that choice. Over the course of the last decade, this game has been lauded with all manner of well-deserved praise, and while the visuals have aged somewhat, the gameplay, the writing and story, and voice acting are every bit as outstanding today as they've ever been. So the next question then becomes, what has changed in this release? On the technical side of things, there have been some improvements made to this game, but those improvements are modest at best. There's new rumble support, which I suppose adds a bit to the immersion. Also, the frame rates have been brought up to a smooth 60 frames per second, even on the Nintendo Switch version, with improved resolutions, some improved textures, better lighting and shadows, and in some places more detailed 3D geometry for the environments. However, it's nothing especially impressive, and there are even some graphical glitches in a few spots, as well as a few blurry and low-resolution textures here and there. Overall, this is definitely an improvement over earlier versions of the game, but you can still see a straight line back to its original release as a Half-Life 2 mod. This is not a game that's going to visually impress anyone. Having said that, visuals were never really the point of this game, so it's not like this game is terribly marred by a less than cutting-edge presentation. The other major change here is the new content that has been added to this version of the game. And even with the spoiler warning earlier, I'm going to remain vague about this so you can still enjoy some amount of surprise. Basically, at one point in the game, you will come across a door literally labeled New Content, and choosing to enter that door leads to, well, the new content. What this leads to is hours worth of new, delightfully funny material, examining the very concept of re-releases and sequels, the Stanley Parable's long history of critical acclaim, and the futility of trying to follow up an experience like this in the first place. And then things get weird in ways that brilliantly recontextualize the original game in fun new ways. With all the new content included here, even those who thoroughly plumbed the depths of prior releases of the Stanley Parable will find hours of new content to explore here, so much that I would strongly argue that fans of the first game should absolutely double dip and buy this version as well. And as I said earlier, if you've never played the Stanley Parable before, you should absolutely get the game now. At just $25, you're looking at one of the most creative, medium-exploring games that has ever been made, and I absolutely think this is a game that everyone should play. Well, that's all I have for this review. Please feel free to comment and let me know what you think, if you agree with what I have to say or disagree. Please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it or a thumbs down if you didn't. And if you want to see more reviews, please head over to the eShopper Reviews subreddit on reddit.com, where I currently have over 2,000 Nintendo Switch game reviews. And if you want to support the subreddit, you can make a donation at our Patreon, which I'll link down below. That's all for this time. Happy playing, eShoppers.